Welcome to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. I'm your host, Shannon Ables. And whether you're listening on your commute, exercising, working in the garden, or sitting down with a hot cup of tea or a cafe au lait, thank you for tuning in. Let's get started. Welcome to the 169th episode of the Simple Sophisticate and our third and the final much anticipated episode of French Week, our second annual French Week here on the podcast and on the blog. And I'm looking forward to introducing you to Géraldine Lepere, who is the woman, the talent behind the French language learning blog and website and YouTube channel, Comme une, Française. Now, we're going to talk about a lot of different things, and mainly the differences between French culture and American and Canadian culture. As well, we're going to dive into how to travel well outside of Paris. Yes, we will talk about Paris, but she's also going to give you some tips on how to enjoy the experience and put your mind at ease and encourage you to get out of Paris. I know it's hard to do that, but there's so many amazing places to go. And her petit plaisir, well, it's something I have a feeling you're going to want to whip up in the kitchen after you hear how she describes it. I hope you enjoy it. And here is Géraldine Lepere. My guest today is the founder of Comme une, Française, a YouTube channel and website dedicated to helping you speak and feel French. Some listeners may remember her as she regularly contributed to the Au Courant series, teaching us how to speak one French phrase or word a week, complete with cultural context. I am so happy to welcome to the podcast Géraldine Lepere. Welcome to the Simple Sophisticate.
Hi, Shannon. Hi, everybody. I'm so honored to be back. We had such a good time together. Welcome.
Now, you yourself, just to give some background to the listeners, are French. You were born in Paris and you currently live in the Alps. What inspired you to create your language learning destination online?
Yeah, it's very funny because there are many, many things. First, my mom is Mexican, so I'm binational. I've got two passports. I'm French and Mexican. So I've always known what it was to be a foreigner because my mom is in France and she still makes a few mistakes in French, and everybody knows that she has an accent. And after that, after my engineering degree, because yes, I'm an engineer, I moved to England for 2 years. I was working in Leeds in Yorkshire. So it was great, but I wanted to learn the language. I wanted to understand the culture, being able to relate to people around me. But I couldn't ask questions about the culture and the jokes all the time. So I was just frustrated. And after 2 years in England, awesome years, I came back to France and I started giving French lessons to refugees at the Red Cross. So it was great. I had an awesome time with them. They were advanced and they have very, very precise questions on French culture, French language, everyday life in France. And I was like, you guys are asking the questions I was asking myself when I was in England, but I had no one to answer my questions. And now I can answer yours. So it was really a revelation because I was providing value to them about everyday life in France. So I got like this idea, maybe I should do that in a bigger size. So in Grenoble, in the Alps, where I live, we have the second biggest expat community in France after Paris. So I started talking to my American friends and Canadians and Australians, asking them, so what do you think about me doing lessons about everyday life in France? For example, how to take a bus, how to go to the gynecologist, how to talk with your neighbors. And they were like, please do that. and it was such a relief for them to know that they could ask someone such basic and sometimes intimate questions that I was like, I thought that's something that could work and help a lot of people. So I started. And that's how 5 years later, it's still out there.
Well, it's doing wonderfully. My goodness, you have quite the following. And it is so relatable. And the thing that I like about it is that it's fun. You sit down, you're not feeling like you're being lectured to. You are so engaging. And you made a point about, in just your comment there, how it is very intimate, some of these questions. And it's real though. People need to feel comfortable asking these questions. Not only are they asking a personal question, that they need help with, but they need to ask in a language that they don't know. I think you really do fulfill quite a need, and I'm glad your friends and the people you talk to encouraged you, because it's a wealth of a resource. You are French in this culture that puts French women on a pedestal, and I want to talk about that a little bit today, because we outsiders, and I will include myself in this, do put you up there. I'm curious, how does it feel to be so adored simply because you are French? And what have we assumed correctly, and what are we a little off the mark on?
Well, first, thank you, because that's very nice. It's very nice to be in this situation. But I think it's more a way of life in general than really something that we French women would put any effort on. For example, it's about enjoying life. And that's why I loved your podcast so much, because it's about enjoying simply life in a luxurious way, just because you are focusing on quality rather than quantity. For example, to me, it's funny that people think that French women are so well dressed. But for example, we are dressed in an okay way all the time for us. For example, I remember very well when I was living in the UK that my friends would change to go out. And in France, you wouldn't necessarily change. Well, unless after a day of work, you want to change to fresh clothes. But the way you dress is not going to change much. So it's more like we have an average and we keep with this average. So we kind of look better than maybe some others who don't really care. But we're not going to make much more effort to go to a special occasion, for example. We don't have, I remember when I discovered that dressing codes, it doesn't exist here.
Ah, interesting. Because they don't have to, because people dress across the line just kind of well all the time, nothing above or nothing below that expectation.
Maybe, yeah. And it's going to the US, going to the UK that I found out that there were dressing codes, but I had no idea.
Where do you think that comes from? Where do people walk out the door with that expectation? Obviously, it may come when they're from the younger, their parents, or is it the culture? Just that, well, you should look presentable all the time. Don't have to dress super fancy. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. Where does that expectation come from that the jobs don't have to tell them, you don't know how to dress, so we're going to tell you how to do it? Where do you think that comes from?
I think it's, we could say that it's social pressure in a way, because everybody's going this way. But also, I think it's more of a general way of life. For example, the same, I just discovered a few months ago the idea that you could have in English tasty food. And for French people, tasty food doesn't make sense because the food itself is supposed to be tasty.
It's by definition food is supposed
so
to
it's more, yeah. So in France, for example, our food is going to be roughly okay all the time, sometimes going to be exceptional, but it's very rarely going to be really bad. So it's the same with clothing, or maybe the average expectation is a bit higher, but it's always this way. So for food, for example, even if it's just a picnic or even a snack, it's going to be really good because that's what we're looking for. And we're not going to eat a lot. We're not going to dress too much, but just our average expectation is that it's supposed to be good and tasty.
And as you said, social pressure, I think we say that in the States as a negative, but I think there's something to be said for raising the bar, for, like you said, food should taste good. That sounds like a simple concept. You should look decent when you walk out the door. That's a simple concept. So that's interesting. Thank you for sharing that difference. And that was actually one of my next questions. You had shared in our email correspondence that a friend who is from Canada, you started to discuss the differences between your North American counterpart and those of you who live in France. Are there any other differences that you observed that either shocked you or you just, wow, you looked at it and went, okay, that's a glaring difference. I wouldn't have expected that. I
wouldn't say it shocked me because I'm very interested by cultural differences, and I don't necessarily see negatives. I just see differences. But we're talking about a visit to Paris, for example. And I was going with a couple of American friends who've never been to Paris before, and my Canadian friend was telling me about her looking through every website she could find to find the best boulangerie, the best restaurants, and everything. I was telling her, just relax. The food in France is okay. I mean, you don't need to go and find the best restaurant because even the average restaurant is going to be really good. And the part of the French way of life is also to just experience life rather than optimize all the time. So we're not going to find the best of the best of the best because a website says it, but you walking in the streets with your friends, having a good time in the sun, and finding this tiny restaurant that doesn't look any good, but it's really tasty, and you discover the best ratatouille ever, is the point of the discovery. So it's not the best in TripAdvisor. It don't have the most fancy outside, but it was great, and you had such a good time with your friends, and that's the point of it.
And to savor those moments. And really what you're talking about is being present and not constantly looking to the future. How can I make this better? How can I perfect this? Is there a drive? And I think I know the answer to this, but I'm curious, your observation, to be perfect or to strive for perfection. A future-driven society is what I see America more as. I'm assuming France is not that way. And why not, if that's the case?
Yeah, that's very interesting, because that's something that's sometimes a bit missing from the French culture. Sometimes to try to get better, especially in services, that's something that I don't really like. But in terms of general culture, we don't strive for that. It's more enjoying the moment, enjoying good food with friends, going to the market, buying, I don't know how many apricots, and maybe two will be half dead in your bag, but that's life, and it doesn't matter.
And you're talking, and you're not in Paris. This is in France. This is in Grenoble. You said you're in Grenoble. Is that right? Or
yes, absolutely, in Grenoble.
And so this is just a cultural everyday, appreciate the everyday. What are some other cultural values or things that the French value as well as the everyday with regards to relationships, professional and personal life, status?
First, the thing that comes to my mind, that you talked about being perfect and everything. For French people, looking effortless is extremely important. This is why it's about enjoying the moment. We're not going to try to be perfect, the best, are looking like we're trying very hard, because for French people, something great that looks effortless is part of the French mind. It has to look easy. And it reminds me of, I don't know if you read this book called Stuff Parisians Like by Olivier Magny, which I love. And I love this book because it's so French. And he talks about our use in French of the word petit, which means small, literally. But we use it all the time to hide the fact that we don't want to strive for perfection, but sometimes we experience awesome things. For example, you would say, on a passé un petit week-end à la plage. We spent a small weekend at the beach, but the beach was something awesome in a massive house. And you're just not saying.
Oh, you downplaying. Okay, focusing on just the simple basics.
Absolutely. And that's extremely French. So everything that looks like you made lots of efforts, it's not really French.
I mean, I that's what I have observed in my experience. And that's not as much as many people, but that has been my experience as well. Do you think, so I've been thinking about this a lot with just our culture in the 21st century in general, but with regards to France, we're a more globalized world now. We are exposed to different cultures all the time with access to the internet. Do you find that France is staying more communal oriented, or is it becoming more individually driven? How has globalization shifted the culture?
I think we get some good things from the US and some bad things from the US. But I think for all the countries, you still keep the spirit of the country. Because your grandparents are from here or from there, your parents live something all together in the country, and you've got this thing that no one talks about, which is inside the mind that you cannot even describe. And this is what usually I talk about in Comme une, Française. I teach stuff that no one would think about telling you. Even though we have globalization, the love for food, for example, is still there. The way we dress is still there. Our love for our country itself is still there. And it's not nationalism or patriotism. It's just something that wired in our brain. And the way that people relate to each other as well, the way their greetings in French are extremely important, is still there. So even if you have globalization and new opportunities everywhere, you're still French in your heart.
Okay, so it's very innate. It's something that no matter what influences, it will be there. That's beautiful. It's refreshing to hear that it can't be so easily influenced out of someone. Really, I mean, because I think that's so much what you just shared is what people fall in love with the French culture, the conversation, there is a decorum, as you said, with the greetings, and that's what many of your videos are about, how to do that properly, how to not make those simple mistakes that we wouldn't know if we weren't part of the French culture. So I think that's lovely. That's reassuring. So thank you.
And you see, when I hear, I won't quote whom, but saying Paris is not Paris. I mean, yeah, Paris is not Paris, but New York is not New York anymore. And any city you can quote is not the same because everybody changes. But what matters is the spirit of it. And the fantasy you have very often about France, about French people, about Paris, is just a fantasy. And it's a fantasy of youth very often because people were students here, they fell in love here. But the city changes because people change as well. So rather than having a fantasy about the city or thinking it was better in the past, it's better to embrace the change and know that the spirit is still there.
That's good advice. And you say that and it makes me think of an article I wrote a few years ago about the Paris syndrome. And this was about all sorts of different international travelers. They come with a certain expectation of Paris, and then they're disappointed. Why do you think that Paris syndrome happens? You kind of already alluded to it. And then how can someone, if they come, how can they make sure they don't fall prey to that?
First is knowing that it's a city where people actually live. So it's not like a museum where there are only people there to welcome you. And some people seem to forget it. And the thing that some people don't like about Paris would be the same about any other really big city. People are working, they're going to work, maybe they're late, they have to pick up their kids, so they don't have much time to go and smile and say hello to you. But also knowing that what's important for French people is the speech. And also the way that we build relationships. It's not the way the Americans do. And it's not bad, it's not good. And the American way is not bad or good, it's just different. For example, for us, silence is respect. So when people don't talk to you, they just respect your privacy. They're not ignoring you. And as soon as you know that, you can embrace it and start speaking step by step. And with Comme une, Française, for example, we have videos about chit chat, about how to buy a baguette, and we give you scripts about how to say a few phrases that will unlock huge doors. Because Paris is huge. We are, I think, the first tourist destination in the world. But there's so many tourists and so many tourists that don't care, that so many people just gave up on trying to be nice. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying this is what happened. So think about it if you're going to Paris. You know you're going to be one of the many, 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 many tourists out there. Many, many, many don't care about France. They just come in a bus, see the Eiffel Tower and leave. They don't even care to say bonjour to anyone. So be different. Embrace a few words. Relax. Know that French people see silence as respect and just build it from there. And I've seen so many people enjoy their second or third Paris visit after Comme une, Française because they knew. And after that, everything changes.
I think, talked about a broadening of our perspectives and being open to a different way of living and working through or, walking through the day and not being rigid about, okay, this is the way I do it. So the only way I'm going to feel comfortable if we do it the way I do it from my country, which I'm not in at the moment. That would be very, very limiting to your experience. Absolutely. I would like to step outside of Paris for a little bit because there's so much more to explore in France. What are some places you enjoy going to? I know you travel all over the country besides Paris.
Yeah, there are cities that are getting extremely popular right now. I know that Nantes is extremely nice. I've been several times because a close friend she hasn't just moved there, but it sounds like it was yesterday. And it's an extremely dynamic city with beautiful surroundings and lots of young people, so lots of concerts, lots of culture. It's a very, very nice city. And Lille as well, a very big city. that is getting more and more popular right now because of everything that's around. You have Belgium right there, you have the UK right there as well. So it's getting better and better. And these are the cities that French people like as well. You have Toulouse as well, very popular. So beautiful architecture with Bordeaux next door. There's so many things to see in France.
I've only gone to the countryside once in the 3 times I visited. And that was a long time ago with the countryside visit. The train system, though, at least when I was in Paris, was amazing. I'm assuming it is just as helpful and easy to get around as I'm imagining. Is that the case? I think that's sometimes what intimidates people to get outside of Paris is, how do I do it? Do I have to get a car? Do I kind of get on train? What would your advice be?
It depends on where you're going, but don't take the plane. That's first, because we are a way smaller country than you think. And we have very fast trains. So, for example, I think Paris to Marseille is 2 or 3 hours. So you can, first is obviously take the train, and then you can rent a car. The way our system works for the faster train, the earlier you book, the cheaper it is. But very often, compared to the prices of your trains out there or your planes, it's way cheaper. So the price is not going to surprise you, but the earlier you book, the cheaper it is.
Okay, so there is a benefit to planning ahead. That makes sense.
Yeah, a little bit. And then you can rent a car once you're there.
And I think that's what I'm going to do next summer, by the way, Géraldine. I am renting a car for a little bit of my country excursion. And I've been told by people who live there, you're going to be fine. It's easy to get around. The roads are easy to navigate.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always surprised when people ask me, so what about security and everything? Well, yeah, just don't leave your gold in the car. But apart from that, it's going to be fine. The worst thing that can happen is a flat tire. But I mean, we have phones everywhere. You can use your phone if you need anything. The roads are pretty easy to navigate. They're in very, very good shape compared. I'm not saying that for all the US because I haven't been there, but when we were traveling on the East Coast with my partner, we were very surprised to see such huge holes in the road.
Yeah, I think that's more common than not, unfortunately. Yeah. They're well traveled over here, that's for sure. But yeah, no, that's good to know. I think that's honestly, I think just hearing it from someone who sees it, lives it, is just reassuring to so many listeners and myself, because we don't know and we do want to explore.
There's nothing to worry about.
Yeah. And
absolutely nothing.
Flat tires can happen anywhere, and we can all deal with it. And I think that's part of the journey and the experience is, what were you going to see around that corner? And, let's stop here. And I think that's the beauty of being able to get a rental car when you want to just kind of be in your own little excursion. I don't know about you, but I'm already feeling more at ease about getting into that rental car next summer and just tooling around the country of France. We have so much more we're going to talk about in our conversation with Géraldine Lepere, but I want to take a moment to introduce you to our sponsor for today's episode. You guys know I'm a journaler. You know I write down my thoughts constantly, and I now want to introduce you to a new app that is free for the first 30 days. The app is called Trunk, and what it does is basically remind you to journal just in case you forget, so that you do journal each day. How does it remind you? It calls you each day for a 2-minute chat. Well, it's a one-way chat. You just get to share your thoughts, and it records it, transcribes it, and saves it for you to do it with whatever you want to. That's the beauty of it. And then even more wonderful, you don't have to pay for it the first 30 days. And if you like what this app does, you can then keep it and enjoy it and never lose an idea because you don't have a notebook with you at any particular time. I know that's happened to me once or twice before, and I am so frustrated. So to avoid that from ever happening again, take a look at the new app in the iTunes store called Trunk and get those dreams and ideas in a safe spot so you can turn them into what they were supposed to become. All right, let's get back to our conversation with Géraldine Lepere. We're going to talk about a few more cultural observations, and she's going to share with us this week's petit plaisir. What are some other cultural observations you would like to share with listeners that they may not know with regards to the French culture?
I would like to say to people who would come to France or who are here that have to, if they want to really enjoy the French spirit, the food is extremely important. And understanding the deep relationship of French people with food and why we do this and that. For example, I was with friends in American friends they were for the first time in Paris a few weeks ago, and it was very interesting for me to see their relationship to food and to restaurants, because it was very, very far away from mine. And for example, when French people go to the restaurant, we don't buy food. We buy time with our friends, and we happen to eat food. So that's why the amount of food is not huge, because for us, if I was going to a restaurant that was serving way too much food, I wouldn't see it as a good restaurant, because they were not able to know how to make good portions. And for us, too much is not good. And that's why it was funny, because I remember a few years ago, there was a huge debate on doggy bags. Should we make doggy bags? And some tourists were angry because there were not doggy bags in France. But the idea of doggy bag doesn't make sense in the French spirit, because if you're ordering food that you don't eat, you shouldn't have ordered it. Or if the restaurant gives you too much, they're not a good restaurant.
They're wasteful, and they haven't planned well. See? Yeah, that makes complete sense. No, it absolutely.
Yeah. So the food that is on your plate is supposed to be eaten as well. Don't throw away food. I think it comes from the Second World War that our grandparents went through, and that is still in the French spirits. Don't throw away food, because our grandparents were hungry. So when we see food sent back to the kitchen, I'm really shocked, I have to say. It's not that I'm shocked at the people who do it, but in my brain, something says something's wrong.
Right. No, that's that cultural, that's innate. This isn't fit. This isn't align with why you're here. You're here to enjoy your company. And that's a shift. I think that really focuses back on what you said. Building relationships are important, and food is important, and greetings are important, but it's the food is secondary in those situations. I think that's important to keep in mind. One thing that I like to talk to or ask my guests on the podcast is, since this experience of living simply luxuriously is about how we cultivate the everyday and make it extraordinary. Can you walk us through an average day for you and how you make it something you just sincerely enjoy? Because you clearly love your life. You enjoy what you do. We can see that energy in your videos. Can you kind of walk us through an average day?
Yeah, sure. I think many people think I have a much more enjoyable life than or more glamorous life than I do. I enjoy my life, but it's not something that's Instagram worthy.
I like your Instagrams. They're real. They're real. I appreciate them.
Yeah, I just show real things. I don't do like stock photos. Yeah, well, if I was to think about the important times in my day as a French person, in the morning, for example, I like to cook breakfast. So I cook breakfast for my partner and I, and we share again. It's a time to share. It's a time shared together. So none of us is going to have breakfast on their own.
It's together, shared experience, shared moments over food. Food's bringing you together.
Yeah, that's the thing. And then I go to work, and I work in a co-working space where are different entrepreneurs there, and we just share like a big open space. And again, what brought us together, we are like 4 years old now, and we have a very strong community because we have lunch together, and all the new people can come and present themselves. They're welcomed, and no one's allowed to eat in front of their desk. And if someone does, we go to them and tell them, so what's going on? Why are you eating there? And I'm very busy. I have to finish something. And we usually laugh and let them do it because they have to. We understand it. But eating in front of their desk is not something that happens.
Right. Letting them know that they feel welcome. And
yes, absolutely. And then after work, I like to cook something in the evening, and that's again something that French people do. We master a few recipes. They don't have to be difficult, but something that you enjoy doing with fresh products that you can either buy at the market or maybe if you have a garden, do it in your garden. But I know that, for example, every 2 weeks we are registered at an AMAP. I don't know if you know this word. It's producer basket that we get every 2 weeks with lots of products in there, like fruits, vegetables, and all fresh and sometimes organic. And that's really great, because every 2 weeks you get this mix of vegetables and fruits, eggs and dairy. And I pick from it and I think about what I'm going to cook during the week with it. And I know that I like to support the local producers as well. So if I was to have one simple pleasure every day, it's really about cooking something simple in the evening. After work, you relax, you just peel your carrots and do some soup, or do un quatre quarts, which is a super simple cake that everybody knows how to do with fresh eggs, or a quiche Lorraine, for example. Something simple. But I know that in the evening, I'm going to have something that's fresh and that's without any industrial stuff. I know what's in there because I made it. And that's very, very French, I would say, to eat something where you know where it comes from.
That's important. Yeah, that's important. It's funny. I recently interviewed someone, and she said the same thing with regards to the end of her day when she gets to have that moment in the kitchen or in her living room where it's just time to unwind. She loves that moment as well, and be present with the life that she's created in her little sanctuary with her family or her animals, and you're seeing that as well with your home. Is there just with regards to and what you're cooking right now, what was the most recent simple recipe that you stepped into the kitchen and just made? Can you share that with our listeners?
Sure. I was talking about un quatre quarts, which is the simplest cake ever. So it's super simple. It says it's 4 quarters in English, literally quatre quarts. And it's because you take some eggs, so 2 or 3, you weight them. And then for the weight, you're going to add the same weight in flour, usually in sugar and butter. I put a little bit less butter and a little bit less sugar, just because I think it's better this way. But that's how it's called, and that's super simple. You add raisin powder and you have your cake. And that's a very French, super simple cake.
Oh, it is. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. And if you want to you can be a bit more fancy. Sometimes I add frozen strawberries in it, or raspberries, and sometimes I do un gâteau marbré. It's a marble cake. So what you do is when you're going to put the dough into the tin, you cut it in half, and half of it or a third of it you put cocoa powder in it. You mix it to make it black, then you put it in the tin and you mix just a little, and when you cook it, it has marble colors.
How simple is that? That sounds like it would look so complicated, but you just walked us through it in less than 30 seconds to make it marble.
It's super simple, and it's so much more beautiful, and my partner loves it. And you make the same cake, but you should change a few things. Sometimes you can make full chocolate in it, or put some lemon icing if you want, whatever you like. But it's super simple. It takes you 10 minutes. And you're done.
Well, I think you've already shared our petit plaisir for this episode. You shared with us a few. That's lovely.
That will be my petit plaisir, yes, the quatre quarts.
That's perfect. I'll make sure that I write down what you just shared, and so they have I mean, it's not that's that complicated, but just in case they want to see it visually on the show notes. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to have to try that this summer.
You have to send me pictures.
I will. I will do that. And they will be real pictures, Géraldine. Trust me. They will not be fancy. I want to make sure that if a new visitor, someone who hasn't been to your website or tuned into your YouTube channel, Comme une, Française, what is something that they will discover, and what can they expect as they begin to learn how to use French? Or maybe what's the first... Your blog or website is so easy to follow. So I'm asking a question that's probably self-explanatory, but what would you suggest they begin, or where should they start?
So on Comme une, Française, our goal is to help people sound French even to the French. We help them to speak French and feel French, because it's not a language course. I don't teach the language itself. I teach the spirit, and it happens to be the language as well, but it's more about the culture, why people think this way, how can you make the same? How can you make people smile, which is sometimes a challenge. And I've heard so many awesome stories from the students telling me, for the first time after 10 times going to the same restaurant, the owner finally did la bise to me, which was such a big honor, just because I went through your course and now I know what I'm supposed to tell him.
They got the kisses on the cheek. I love it. That's beautiful.
Absolutely. So for our audience here listening today, first, thank you very much for listening. And on Comme une, Française, what we're offering right now is an awesome free course called it's Everyday French, and it's our Everyday French crash course. It's a 10-day email course about French language, French culture, French spirit, a bit of French fashion and French food, and it will help you get started. And as we say, double your Frenchness in 10 days. And we had awesome feedback from the people who took it. It's completely free. You can unsubscribe anytime if you don't like it. And I'm very, very glad to share it with your audience.
Thank you so much. I'm going to be signing up for this. This sounds fantastic. And I'll make sure that I have a link to that and all the other information we may need on the show notes today for that. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Shannon.
Géraldine, thank you for joining me as a guest today on the podcast. Having heard your voice on the podcast before, it is nice to be able to sit down and just chat with you today.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me. And I wish the whole audience a very, very nice day.
Listeners, visit Géraldine's website, Comme une, Française, and enjoy the journey of learning the French language, as well as more about the culture with the teacher who makes it a most engaging and pleasurable experience. In other words, you'll have fun while you learn. And who doesn't want to have fun while they learn? For the show notes of this episode, visit the blog, The Simply Luxurious Life, and go to thesimplyluxuriouslife.com/podcast 169. You'll find the recipe for Géraldine's Petit Plaisir. You'll find links to her blog, to her YouTube channel, to sign up for that everyday crash course in 10 days, improve your Frenchness, and anything else that we talked about that you may be interested in. I think you'll find it to be a wealth of a resource if you haven't already visited, and Géraldine just adds that extra enthusiasm that makes you want to continue to try even when you forgot to not pronounce a certain letter. I know I've done that so many times. Thank you so much for tuning in this French week of the Simply Luxurious Life blog and the Simple Sophisticate podcast. We're going to do it again next year, but we're also going to get back into our regular every Monday, a new episode on this podcast. I do hope you'll join me. Until then, have a beautiful weekend. Thank you for tuning in to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. For more ideas and inspiration throughout the week, stop by the blog, thesimplyluxuriouslife.com, or pick up the book, now available on Audible, iTunes, and Amazon, as well as in paperback, Choosing the Simply Luxurious Life, A Modern Woman's Guide. To stay caught up on the most recent episodes of the podcast, blog posts, and to receive exclusive news as well as an extra dose of inspiration to start your weekend, subscribe to the Simply Luxurious Life's weekly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox each Friday morning to enjoy with a hot cup of tea or a hot cup of coffee. Thank you for listening. I'm your host, Shannon Ables. À la prochaine.